Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Uncle Frank. Let's talk about it. The Uncle Frank is an Amazon Prime film that is written and directed by Alan Ball. Now, this is the story of Uncle Frank, who is a closeted gay man who has to return home back to his family after unforeseen circumstances, and he has to deal with the consequences of keeping so many secrets from his family members during this crazy, dramatic, melodramatic even family reunion. Now, this is also somewhat of a coming-of-age story for the character of Beth, who is Frank's niece, and she's brilliantly portrayed by Sophia Lillis here. I absolutely loved this character, and this film very much tells the story from her perspective, which is a very interesting choice. We'll dive into my thoughts on that choice later on in my review, but before we get into my thoughts on the film overall, just a friendly little reminder that if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Alright, so without further ado, let's dive into this one. So I don't know if you guys can tell, but I am in a chipper mood and that's because I am so happy to be bringing you guys this review because I thoroughly enjoyed myself watching this film. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Oh, how refreshing. It was like a breath of fresh air. Now, it isn't perfect, and again, we'll discuss the issues that I had with it, but I must say overall, what an enjoyable experience. It was just easy, breezy, fun, and really entertaining and engaging. It's so refreshing after having done the review for Hillbilly Elegy to be able to say that, especially considering that the subject matters are pretty similar in that they explore these characters who come from very similar environments but have managed to escape from them under different circumstances. In the case of Uncle Frank, it's very much a story about this gay man who's coming to terms with his sexuality and sharing his sexuality with his family, as opposed to the story of Hillbilly Elegy, which you can find out more about that in my review. But here I thoroughly enjoyed the exploration of this character, and in fact the three main characters being Frank, Beth, and Wally. Love Wally so much. He is so adorable. And in fact, let's get into the first thing that I actually really enjoyed about this film, and that was 100% this trio. This trio is incredible, especially when we dive into that kind of road trip aspect of this story. They're so fun. They're so fun to go on this journey with. The interactions and the characters themselves feel very genuine and authentic, and the actors' performances in these roles are very understated, especially in the case of Paul Bettany and Sophia Lillis. They're so similar in a lot of ways in terms of their personality that you can really see why they connect as family members who don't quite fit in to the rest of the family. But then you have the character of Wally, who's just like a ray of sunshine everywhere he goes. I love him. Absolutely love him. He's like the personification of a smile. Like, I loved Wally, and I was so upset when he got upset. Like, I felt for him. He was a very sympathetic and empathetic character in that way. I very much enjoy these characters. They carried this film so well, and even though I did have issues with the story itself, I think their portrayals of these characters made it such an enjoyable and engaging experience. But even though I did have fun with these characters, the issues that I had with the film are still present. First of all, I wanted to dive into the relationship between Wally and Frank, because I think whilst the actors had great chemistry, I don't think I got enough of a sense of why they were together in the first place. I didn't really get a sense of how they fell in love with one another. We do get an explanation of how they met, given by Frank, and it seems as though, you know, he remembers the occasion fondly, and it seems like it's something that he holds dear to his heart, but we don't really get enough of those interactions on screen in order to really show us that romance and show us the love that exists between these two under happier circumstances. Instead, what we get a lot of is the difficulties that they've had to go through, especially because of Frank's trauma. So unfortunately, sometimes it somewhat felt like Wally was more of a babysitter to Frank, and it felt like he was far more devoted to their relationship than Frank was. Now, that is of course because of the, you know, past that he is trying to get over and the trauma that he's trying to get over, but as a result it does very much feel like Wally is trying to like drag him through their relationship. I just wanted a few more scenes where they were just like genuinely happy together, and we don't really get much of that. And the main reason why we don't is, as I was alluding to before, because the focus is kind of on Beth at the same time. The story is told from her perspective, which is quite interesting. I think this film would have worked better if it was told from the perspective of Frank himself. I mean, I guess it wouldn't be Uncle Frank in that way, but I do find it bizarre that the story is told from Beth's perspective, because firstly, we don't get a lot of that kind of romance and sensuality between the two, because a lot of the time Beth is witnessing, you know, the downfalls of their relationships, or the less than savory sides of their relationships, as Frank is going through, you know, this horrible tragedy of the death of his father, and, you know, all of this trauma that's bringing up from his childhood. And also we have the fact that because Beth is a spectator, we don't really get a lot of exploration of things that they would discuss if Beth wasn't there. A lot of things are left unsaid, basically. Like, Wally is constantly reminding Frank, you know, don't go down this path again, because we know what happens when you go down this path, ... And because Beth is this, you know, younger spectator that Uncle Frank doesn't want to share all of his problems with, we never really get to see how bad things got in the past. It's always just kind of alluded to. And I think having that story be told on screen from beginning to end would have been very interesting, but it doesn't fully commit to that. It kind of sugarcoats everything because Beth is there as this somewhat underage spectator to these real life, you know, really traumatic issues that Frank is going through. But even though having Beth as this constant presence in Frank's life during this time does somewhat hinder the kind of romantic and more intimate aspect of his relationship with Wally, I did still very much enjoy the relationship between Beth and Frank. I think they just had such a cute, genuine connection there, in the fact that they found camaraderie in being the outsiders of their family. However, having said that, I still don't quite understand why it is that Beth felt like an outsider. It feels like the film at some point somewhat alludes to the idea that she may be, you know, an LGBTQ character, but it doesn't really commit to that. I think the idea is more that she doesn't really feel connected to the female members of her family because they've gone down, you know, another route in terms of their life's path. Like, they've had children, they've gotten married, whereas she's not really interested in doing any of those things at this point in her life. So I feel like that's just kind of how she feels a bit disconnected, but it's never really clarified. It's never really made clear why it is that she feels so outcasted from her family. And in fact, it's kind of inconsistent at a lot of times, especially when they're at the grandfather's funeral. It seems as though she's getting along with her family members, you know, just fine. Like, yes, her mum forgets to call her Beth instead of Betty, but she's willing to make that change. It's just that she, you know, has to consciously remind herself. So I didn't really understand what the point of contention was there. Was it like an actual issue or an actual problem that they had as a family? Because even the father, like at the beginning, the father comes across as he's a dickhead. Like, he's the worst. Beth's father absolutely sucks at the beginning, but then in the end, like, he's kind of like a teddy bear. Like, he kind of softens up so much, and you expect him to be so much harsher, especially when Frank's sexuality is revealed, which we'll get into in a second. But in the end, like, he doesn't really present himself as someone who has any beef with Beth. So I didn't quite understand what the dynamic of that family was and why it is that she felt so outcasted from them. In stark contrast, however, I think the film does an excellent job of exploring Frank's relationship with his father. That is made very, very clear. Like, even when they have so few interactions together in person, that relationship is just so clear in this film, and it's because of the flashbacks, and it's also because of the very few moments that they do have together in the same room. I mean, you have that eye contact, or the lack thereof, and just the general stiffness that his father has around him, and the way that he treats him, the way that he ignored his present and dismissed it, the way that he left him out of his will. Let's talk about that will scene. That will scene, this is a huge spoiler, by the way, but that will scene is, I haven't been that tense since Knives Out. Like, Knives Out is the last, you know, reading of the will scene that I have been so tense on. That was, I was so shocked. I did not see that coming whatsoever. I said out loud that Frank was either getting everything for some reason, just in a shock twist, or nothing at all. That's what I predicted. But instead, the father takes it one step further. He took it one step further and outed his son beyond the grave. Beyond the grave. I was shocked. I was horrified. Oh my God, that scene very much elevated the film for me, because it was all fun and games until that scene came along, where that was truly like gut-wrenching. Admittedly, the film itself never really reaches that level of tension again subsequently, because afterwards we have, you know, Frank reacting to that huge bombshell of a moment that his family now knows that he's gay, and he runs out and he goes like swimming or something, you know, because he's plagued with the memories of his past past lover, past, you know, friend, boyfriend, Sam, who ended up killing himself when they were both just teenagers. So he's played with those memories and that trauma, and the fact that now his father has just outed him from beyond the grave. What, the hatred is real. Anyway, so he ends up running off, and he also has an alcohol problem, so he ends up drinking a ton, running off, swimming, I guess, and then he comes back. I feel like that whole sequence didn't have that same tension as that one, you know, will reading sequence, because I kind of knew that Frank would be back. But unfortunately, considering all of that drama, I do think it was a little bit of a cop-out that the film ultimately gave Uncle Frank a very happy ending. Like, he got the best possible ending that he could have ever hoped for, because his family was generally very accepting of him. Even his brother, who again at the beginning is presented as this huge dickhead, like he's presented as someone who is following in the footsteps of their father, but in the end he ends up being a softie and he's very understanding towards his brother, and he says, you know, no matter what, you're my big brother and this is no problem. And whilst that's a very emotional scene, it seems as though that whole setup of his brother being such a dickhead was kind of for no reason. Like, and also that contentious relationship that he had with his daughter seemed for no reason as well. But then you also have that very emotional and heartfelt scene that Frank has with his mother, and again that was so emotional, so heartfelt, so beautiful, but ultimately he's given a very happy ending. You know, everything is tied off with a very neat bow. There is that instance where his sister's husband is somewhat discriminatory, like he still doesn't understand, he still doesn't get it, and so even though he does shake Frank's hand and he does try to play along, he still voices his concerns in the hallways, which I found to be very realistic, especially for the time and the area, the culture of that area. I also found Frank's aunt, I believe she is, Aunt Butch, her reaction was also quite realistic to me, because she accepted his sexuality, but her thoughts on it was still plagued by all of these stereotypes and all of these misunderstandings that she had surrounding it. And she also very much reiterated that belief that he's going to hell because he's gay. That's a message that we've seen reiterated time and time again here, because they seem to be a very religious family, and that seems to be one of the, you know, main components of the reason why his father was so hateful towards him and his sexuality. And just in general, what made the family's reactions feel a little bit more realistic were just the subtle sprinklings of stereotypes, okay? Sprinklings of, oh, my hairdresser's gay, so it's fine, like as if that has anything to do with the situation. And you can see, you know, Frank's face is like, okay, this is the best that I'm going to get. Like, he's not delighted, except of course when he visits his mother, that's when he really crumbles. But when the rest of the family, especially his brother's wife, is talking about how her hairdresser's gay and like it's fine, I guess, like that has nothing to do with it. But because of the family's lack of exposure to, you know, Frank's sexuality and the discourse surrounding it, they don't really know what to say. Like, they're trying to relate it to their own experiences to kind of make sense of how Frank would lead his life. And, you know, despite the fact that they've been taught that this is the wrong way and it's going to end up with him in hell, they're trying to make sense of it in a context that they can understand. And so even though they're not quite there in terms of being fully accepting and just accepting the fact that his sexuality has nothing to do with them and it's just all about his own life, they decided to kind of connect it to, like, oh, I know this one man who lives in this one town who's also gay. It's like, great. I don't know him personally, but fine. But overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this film, even though I did have issues with the story itself. As I said, I think the trio that lead us on this journey to South Carolina were just so charismatic. They felt so genuine. And I will say that the story did very much take us on this roller coaster of exploring Frank's sexuality and his family's reaction to it. But ultimately, I do think that the ending was somewhat sugar-coated, and I think the story itself would have felt a bit more profound and a bit more meaty if we had dove into Frank's perspective from start to finish, as opposed to diverting to Beth's, who never really has her own story to tell. She's more of a spectator of Frank's story, and that's a very interesting angle to take, especially because Beth herself doesn't take Frank's story as an inspiration to come out, which is something that I expected to happen in the film, but that never really does. So with all of that being said, I'm going to give Uncle Frank a 7 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Uncle Frank, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!